We've chosen the theme "Don't Follow Canada's Lead" based on an article written by Dr. Saba, who's actually a press release he wrote to the media. And when I saw that press release, I thought this is exactly the message we have. This will be recorded. It'll be shared with people worldwide, obviously speaking. And so I have Dr. Saba with me today. You can see Dr. Saba is actually adjusting his camera. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint just to update everybody. I won't be spending too much time on it. And then Dr. Saba is going to take over. We will be able to take questions. Dr. Saba, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm a family physician, and I work in Lachine, Quebec. Have been fighting this good fight against assisted suicide for at least 10 years. When Quebec first had a hearing in 2010, and continued to fight that through the courts. We were able to stop the law for about 2 weeks in 2015. At that time, we had the support of the Attorney General under the guide of Stephen Harper. But when the government changed, Trudeau had the Attorney General do a flip-flop, and they turned against us. So 2 weeks earlier, they had been with us. 2 weeks later, they were against us. They insisted they weren't changing a position, but in fact they were, because that's what the court shows. I've continued the fight through the courts. We've been allowed to continue, but it's very costly. And the parameters under which we could fight have become smaller and smaller, including conscientious objection. As you know, that has not been very successful in Ontario. I have taken the fight internationally, speaking at international forums, written a book called Made to Live, where I chronicle the fight against assisted suicide and euthanasia in Canada around the world. I believe that we have an opportunity to tell the world not to follow Canada's example, because when it was supposed to be only for the terminally ill, for a handful, even though that wasn't ethical, that's how they sold it. As everybody's aware, there's been over 20,000 deaths since 2016. They've extending it now to those who are disabled, to the depressed, and they are going to eventually be talking about children. So what happened with other countries in Belgium and in Holland, or I should say the Netherlands, even though at hearings they insisted that Canada would never do the rest of the world because we're just a different type of people. We've actually are different in the sense we've gone faster and harder in the wrong direction, and expanding this to really destroy Canadians who have years and years of quality life to live. So that's basically my introduction.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saba. So Canada, as you know, legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide in June of 2016. So this was done through Bill C-14. This was supposed to be originally sold to us as something would be only for those extreme circumstances. This was told to us, even though we knew by the language of the bill that it wasn't as tight as they had claimed to be. They always said this was going to be tight legislation. Since then, Canada has nearly passed Bill C-7. So what happened is Parliament has passed Bill C-7 twice. The first time they passed it was in early December. And then what happens is now it's Bill C-7 has been expanded again through the Senate. So what's happening is that right now, Bill C-7, which was supposed to be a response to the Quebec Truchon court decision, which struck down that natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. It struck down the false terminal illness requirement in the law, that in fact this bill goes much further than Truchon ever went. Also, we have not done in Canada the 5-year review of the law, which was required by Bill C-14. So those people who remember Bill C-14, the final section of the bill required a 5-year review of the law to begin in June of 2020. It has never begun, and it hopefully will actually be a proper review, but I don't have a lot of strong feelings about this government doing a proper review, but that's just my feelings. In July 2020, Health Canada released its first annual report, and what it showed on May, now isn't that funny, first annual report in July of 2020, knowing it had been legalized in June of 2020. The data was gathered from the reports submitted by the physicians and nurse practitioners who caused death. So that's where the data comes from. Now remember, this is a self-reporting system. There's no requirement that a third party or neutral person submit the report. So what you have is a situation where if Alex did a euthanasia death, I'm sending in the report. So clearly these reports are questionable for their accuracy. The data from the report indicated that there have been 5,631 euthanasia made deaths in 2019. We don't have 2020 data. And the reason we don't have 2020 data is the government is very, very, very slow in collecting data. We personally, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, have all the data from Ontario. That's because we've done that through access of information, and we received monthly reports because we were approved for that. But anyway, in 2018, there had been 4,467. So that was a big increase into 2019. That means that as of December 31st, 2019, there have been 13,946 reported medically assisted deaths in Canada. Reported because there might have been many unreported deaths. We know from the Quebec reports that there's missing data in those reports. So we know that there's a certain percentage of unreported deaths. There's just no way of finding out how, because the reporting system is the way it is. So now in Ontario, this gives you a better idea of what's going on in Canada right now. The Office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario collects the data in Ontario. And as of December 31st, 2020, there have been 6,696 reported, again, reported. If some reports never arrive, therefore the coroner would not know that that had been in a euthanasia death, right? 6,694 were euthanasia deaths, 2 were assisted suicide deaths. So it shows you that where you have euthanasia and assisted suicide legal, almost all the deaths are by lethal injection. What's most important to look at the data is that this is Ontario data only, but remember, Ontario is the largest province in Canada. It represents 39% of the Canadian population. The increase in 2020 was by 1/3. There was 1/3 more deaths by euthanasia in 2020 over 2019. So when I showed you the 2019 data, that in 2019 in Canada, there have been 5,631 deaths, it's very likely that that number was 1/3 or maybe a little less than that, but pretty close to 1/3 more in 2020. We don't know because the data just isn't yet available. It shows you that in Ontario alone, there have been 2,378 reported assisted deaths in 2020 alone, which was up from 1,789 in 2019. Now, what's significant about that is that's almost 200 a month in Ontario alone. Okay, significant, knowing that in 2014, the Quebec Health Minister said that he had projected there'd be about 100 a year. Bill C7, now what did it do? I'm going to go through what the original bill did and then what the amendments did, okay? So you get the full idea of what happened. So Bill C7, what it did is remove the requirement in law that a person's natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable in order to qualify for an assisted death. Now that was a definition they used for terminal illness. Now, I always thought that was a fake definition. And if you read the legal understanding of that term from the other side, the pro-euthanasia side, they also agreed that that was a fake term, because I would say that it's very likely that all of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. Nonetheless, people who are not terminally ill can now die by euthanasia by that court decision striking that down. And that was in the Truchon decision. So the Truchon decision was based on the fact that Truchon and Gladue were 2 people with disabilities who were asking for euthanasia, but who were not terminally ill. They had no sign that they were dying anytime soon, even though they had significant disabilities. So they then went to the Quebec court asking for that to be struck down, and the Quebec court struck that down based on an inequality in the law. It said that it wasn't giving them equality based on disabilities. Bill C7 also permitted doctors and nurses to lethally inject a person who was incapable of consenting, if that person was previously approved for assisted death. So the Bill C7 didn't go as far as allowing euthanasia through an advance directive, but it said that if you had been approved already, and then let's say you had a stroke and you became incompetent, then you could die by euthanasia anyway. So this was a change because the original law said you had to be capable of consenting at the time of death. This means you don't have to be capable of consenting at the time of death. This also, in my opinion, contravenes the Carter decision from the Supreme Court of Canada. And I'm not a lawyer, but if you read Carter, you realize it's talking about the ability to consent as a primary reason to allow euthanasia. Bill C-7 waived the 10-day waiting period. So it said that if your natural death was deemed to be reasonably foreseeable, what does that mean? Then you could die the same day. So on a bad day, you could request euthanasia and die the same day based on that they deem that your natural death is reasonably foreseeable. I'm going to go into something about that later. Bill C-7 also created a two-track law and said that if your natural death is deemed to be reasonably foreseeable, there's no waiting period. But if it is deemed not to be reasonably foreseeable, meaning you're not dying anytime soon, that there'd be a 90-day waiting period. I'm going to go into this a bit later. Bill C-7 falsely claimed to prevent euthanasia for people with mental illness. So I'm going to get into this right now. I've always believed, without a question, that Bill C-7 allowed euthanasia for mental illness. And even though they had a little caveat in there that it did not, I explained that because of a lack of definition, it did already. And the reason is the euthanasia law permitted MAID for people who are physically or psychologically suffering. And it says that is intolerable, based on it being intolerable to the person, and that cannot be relieved in a way that the person considers acceptable. But mental illness was already seen as a form of psychological suffering. All right. So therefore, mental illness was already being approved by Bill C-7. Okay. So I think that it was already there, but it wasn't clear. Canada's Parliament passed Bill C-7 in early December. Bill C-7 then went to the Senate for a debate and a vote. The Senate amended Bill C-7 in 5 ways, but the 2 main ways were it allowed euthanasia for mental illness alone, and it allowed euthanasia by advanced request, whereby a person could request death in their advanced directive. And what that means is that somebody could say that if I had dementia, that I would want to die by euthanasia. It could be in my advanced directive. So if I became incapable of requesting death, that it had already been requested, and that would be considered acceptable. On November 24th, Justice Minister Lametti told the Senate committee at a pre-hearing for Bill C-7 that he planned to extend euthanasia to people with mental illness after Bill C-7 had passed. So I took that personally. I'm not saying this is anybody else's position. I'm saying this is my position. I personally think that this was code to the Senate of Canada. Go ahead and amend Bill C-7. You can tell me I'm wrong. It's just my personal feeling, right? After the Senate amended Bill C-7, the Justice Minister accepted the amendment to allow euthanasia for mental illness alone, but he rejected the advanced request for euthanasia amendment. But he also established this 24-month hold on the legislation, saying that euthanasia for mental illness alone would be held for 24 months to provide time for the government to establish protocols, whatever that will mean. Further concerns: Canada has approved euthanasia for people with mental illness alone with likely a 90-day waiting period, right? Because they're not terminally ill. That's what's in Bill C-7, 90-day waiting period if your natural death is not deemed to be reasonably foreseeable. But it doesn't require a person to at least try effective treatments. No requirement. Now, the protocols in the Netherlands and Belgium, now this is not written in their law, it's a protocol concerning euthanasia for mental illness, requires a 1-year waiting period whereby the person is expected to attempt all effective treatments. So if you look at the protocol in the Netherlands and Belgium, and I'm not suggesting these protocols are being followed, I'm simply saying that in the Netherlands and Belgium, it's expected that if you want to die by euthanasia for mental illness, you at least try effective treatment. Canada does not require you to try effective treatment. Dr. Saba, I'm not going to take any wind from the sails, but I will say that in Canada, it's unlikely you can receive treatment for mental illness, like a waiting period for actually being referred to the specialist might be more than 90 days anyway. So it's sort of a silly thing that we have a 90-day waiting period, knowing that we've got these waiting periods to see a psychiatrist. There's still no definition for the phrase natural death is reasonably foreseeable. So what the law is saying is that you don't have to have your natural death being reasonably foreseeable, but if it isn't, if you're deemed that it's not reasonably foreseeable, there's no waiting period. But if you're deemed not to have a death that's reasonably foreseeable, that you would have a 90-day waiting period. But if your death is deemed reasonably foreseeable, there's no waiting period. But we haven't defined the term natural death as reasonably foreseeable. Now, why is this a problem? Well, this two-track law creates what I call an inequality in the law. So in the Truchot decision, the Quebec court said requiring that a natural death be reasonably foreseeable was unconstitutional because it created an inequality for people with disabilities, right? So now you've created a new inequality in the law with a two-track law, but you haven't properly defined or defined at all natural death as reasonably foreseeable. This is a serious problem. Think about this. The two-track law states this, yet there is no definition. Therefore, it's going to lead to a future court case. There'll be a future court case to strike down the 90-day waiting period. And in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, in my opinion, the court will be consistent and it will strike down the 90-day waiting period. Without definition, definitions will develop over time. So in June 2017, so that's already almost 4 years ago, Justice Perel in Ontario approved the death of a woman who was not terminally ill but was living with osteoarthritis. Perel stated that reasonably foreseeable didn't have to be imminent and is determined based on a trajectory towards death, whatever that means. Okay. Perel concluded that AB's natural death was reasonably foreseeable because she was almost 80 years old. She was in fact 77. So I guess 3 years is almost. Had an advanced state of incurable, irreversible, and worsening illness with pain and no quality of life. So he said that even though she's not terminally ill, she is terminally ill because she fits other requirements of the law already. That's what he said. So in fact, what does it actually mean that your natural death be reasonably foreseeable? It doesn't have a clear meaning at all. And in fact, anybody being told they have a 90-day waiting period and they do have, let's say, significant disabilities, they could easily challenge this current regime. Okay. Well, not the current one, the future new regime. The other question is, well, how do people die by euthanasia? So Dr. Joel Zivit is a Canadian, but he works in the US. We won't hold that against him. He's reported that research shows that based on the use of the drugs that they use for euthanasia, that death by euthanasia and assisted suicide is a death which is similar to drowning. That's what he's concluded. Now he's done autopsies, okay? And he looked at the autopsy results. So what he's found is that the drugs they use for euthanasia will paralyze the body, but it makes it also impossible to breathe. So we're always told that these drugs actually shut down the heart. He's saying, no, they do not shut down the heart. They actually shut down the lungs. They make it impossible to breathe, but they do not block the sensation of pain. He says, but they cannot struggle because they're paralyzed. And autopsies actually show that the lungs have filled up with fluid. Lungs filling up with fluid means it's a death by drowning, but they can't struggle, they can't complain because they've been paralyzed. That's how death occurs. It's a death by drowning. We were successful in defeating euthanasia bills in the past. We defeated a bill in Canada in 2010 by a vote of 228 to 59, but we were so successful that the courts got involved. We must continue, though, to tell people what the legislation does and how it does it. Just yesterday, I was speaking to a woman who was opposed to euthanasia, but didn't realize that it was legal in Canada. Shocking, eh? I tell you, we must work with everyone who cares. We must expose the truth by helping people find and distribute stories about this. We must be about the stories. Stories are important in the culture. Fighting euthanasia and assisted suicide. We must call it what it is. Using terms such as aid in dying, physician-assisted death, medical assistance in dying, doctor-prescribed death doesn't help us. Doesn't help us at all. We oppose these laws because they allow one person to be directly involved with killing a person or assisting the suicide of another person. We're involved, like as much as I don't think suicide is ever a good idea, this is not about suicide because somebody else is directly involved with either killing you or assisting your suicide. It's someone else being involved, which is the primary issue as to why this is such a horrific idea. Creating exceptions to homicide and manslaughter are simply bad ideas. Simply bad ideas. I note the term aid in dying is used for the term both euthanasia and assisted suicide. So if you're an American and you hear the other side using the term aid in dying, they're not talking about assisted suicide alone. Okay? They're just simply not. That definition is used for both. We need to talk about what it is. The other side claims these are deaths with dignity. They describe them as peaceful and quick and painless. We know that many of these deaths are not peaceful, they're not quick, and they're not painless. We must care about people and not be involved with killing. We must oppose killing. It must be all for caring for people. Now, here's the point. When fighting assisted suicide and euthanasia, we can't make the mistake of focusing on palliative care only. And here's the reason. It's not that palliative care is not a good thing. Palliative care, good palliative care, that is central to what is needed in the culture. Nonetheless, assisted suicide advocates and euthanasia advocates also support palliative care. They just don't have a problem with assisting a suicide or killing someone. They support palliative care. So when you say, well, we support palliative care, you're actually not making an argument for the legislator to say, oh, there's a clear difference between these two groups. Well, in fact, that's not the difference between us, okay? Focusing on palliative care also causes us to focus on pain and symptom management. Even though palliative care can be excellent, the other side kept on focusing on the fact that there's some cases, there's the few cases, but remember, they would then emphasize the few cases, and then we get euthanasia boom for everyone. We must focus on what assisted suicide and euthanasia is, not why it is unnecessary, even though unnecessary is a good point. We must work with people from all political points of view. There's not one silver bullet to prevent the passage of these euthanasia laws. So for instance, we just won a victory today in Portugal. Portugal passed a euthanasia bill, and the president refused to sign the bill into law, the president of Portugal. Instead, he referred it to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court in Portugal struck down the law. They said no. So that law will never come into being. Now, why? It was based on the language of the law. They struck it down. So this is very important to understand that the circumstance in Portugal might be very different than the circumstance in Massachusetts. People with disabilities also have personal experience that needs to be heard by the politicians. Now, the one sad thing in Canada is as much as the people with disabilities stood up, were vocal, they should have been listened to, that in fact we saw that the Liberal government, the Bloc Québécois, who voted together to pass this stuff, that in fact they were not listening to people with disabilities. And these are the same political people who tend to say, because they're more liberal or socialist leaning, they tend to talk about the importance of caring for the vulnerable in the sense of a political nature, and yet they did not listen to people with disabilities who were opposed to these extensions and opposed to euthanasia. So it does really give us pause, but the stories that these people had were very important. We must encourage people to work together. We must never discourage people from working on their own. There's quite a few people in Canada who've been working very hard against this stuff to defeat the Bill C-7, who were working on their own. There was nothing wrong with that. Like the Netherlands and Belgium, Canada's talking about expanding euthanasia now for children, for incompetent people through an advanced request, for people with Alzheimer's and dementia, while people with mental illness, they've already allowed that now. In November 2020, as I say, Canada's Justice Minister told the Senate that he wanted to expand euthanasia to include people with mental illness. And as a fait accompli, obviously, that's what he approved. We've got the problem in Canada of trampling on conscience rights. The BC government built the hospice on February 24th because they refused to cure patients. In Ontario, doctors must provide an effective referral for euthanasia. An effective referral means referral for the purpose of the act. This requires conscientious objectors to be directly involved in the act. This has in fact gone insane. You know, you can say what you want. You know, they're going to be selling euthanasia and assisted suicide in all these other places. They say, well, we're just going to have a little bit of it. It's only going to be to prevent suffering. Right now in the Netherlands, they're talking about expanding euthanasia to children. And what is their argument? Their argument is children suffer too. That's the argument of the government. They're not thinking about the fact that they've always sold euthanasia in the Netherlands based on autonomy, but the child lacks the ability to consent. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, they say, because they're now talking about, well, you know, children suffer. So I'm going to move over to Dr. Saba, and he's going to talk about more about what's his experience.
I think it's what you said, Alex, is so important that we get this message and that we don't give up. Even though Canada is going down the wrong road, I think we can be a warning to other countries. I think we have the experience of what's happened here, because I remember back in the early hearings, the consultations in Quebec, whenever I brought up the experience of Belgium and the Netherlands, they said, well, Dr. Saba, those are a different type of people, kind of like that they were much more pro-death than we were, and that we're a different tribe and nation. But yeah, we are a different tribe and nation. We're much more aggressive in getting rid of people and in a faster way. And as you showed for even people with the mental illness, with people with mental illness, Belgium and Holland require treatments. We don't require any type of treatments, but probably, like you said, it's so difficult. So, as the Supreme Court justices insisted wrongly, it doesn't matter if you don't have care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We don't have access to care, whether it's physical, mental health, palliative care. 70% of people don't have palliative care. So it does matter. And even though in multiple forums I've spoken, I said Parliament did not have an obligation to pass assisted suicide. They absolutely didn't have to do that. They could have used the notwithstanding clause. And Parliament's supposed to be there to protect people, to help people, to support people, to protect the public good. But they obviously aren't there, as the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois, and it's very, the Bloc Québécois, who claims to be representing the best interests of Quebecers. Obviously, they aren't. Neither is, the Liberal government. And it's up to the.
Tell them a little bit what you were doing at with the World Medical Association, because that's part of the battle here, convincing people outside of Canada, don't follow our lead.
Yeah, I had the different forums, because at the World Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association asked the world body to go neutral. They said, if you go neutral, let everybody make up their own mind. And we argued that was exactly what the Canadian Medical Association did in Canada. And the Supreme Court then argued, well, the doctors aren't against it. So if you're not against it, must be you're for it. So that's a trick. They got lots of tricks up their sleeve, but I think it's important that we call them out on their tricks, not be afraid to do so. As you know, I've never been a strong proponent of the conscientious objection clause. Not that I don't believe that the doctors should be forced, but I'm saying that I don't think it's our strongest argument. I think we have to go full tilt, frontal, saying this is wrong. Tell the other countries, don't follow into the bag of tricks that that many people fell here in Canada. Protect your people, protect your depressed, protect your disabled, protect your children, because it's going to be down. I remember early on, it was the story I would hear on the radio. Well, if you got a 99-year-old person with the metastatic cancer, body racked in pain, agonizing pain. That's what they would bring up at these consultations. Dr. Saba, come on, what's a few days? We're only talking a few people. And I would say, no, this is not the story I always give is the one of the Good Samaritan model of medicine, because that's modern. Because they would say, well, Dr. Saba, that was then, now is now. No, I said, no, this is now. Good Samaritan model of medicine is the basis for modern medicine. And that's what we based all of our caring attitudes. And that's why hospitals were opened, attached to churches. And the story of Jesus taking telling the lawyer, if you want to, who's your neighbor? Well, it's the Samaritan who put the person on the donkey and took him to the inn. And before he even took him on the donkey, he did first aid, the wine and alcohol and oil. And he told the innkeeper, he says, here's some money, and whatever more you need, take care of him when I come back. And we never know, this poor fellow, beaten up by bandits, apparently, left half dead on the side of the road. He had very little quality of life from what we could see at that moment. And he wasn't survivable, especially in today's, model of, back then you didn't make it when you're left half dead. Today you can make it. But it didn't matter what happened to the guy. The thing is that we cared for him. And that's really what modern medicine is based on, should be based on. But we're moving away from that. We're going back to the Roman model of, if you don't have, if you're weak-minded or feeble or elderly, or have mental health problems, you're better off dead. The Roman model of killing yourself. That's noble. It's honorable. It shows your autonomy and liberty. And this is far from modern medicine. Sir William Osler taught. Sir William Osler, I'm a graduate of McGill, and he graduated from McGill. He founded Johns Hopkins, and he was the father of modern medicine and modern medical ethics. So these politicians have no idea what medicine's all about, and we shouldn't let them take the lead. We need to take the lead. We need to take back. In Canada, it appears that it's been taken away, but we need to get the message out to other countries around the world. We have to say, don't do what Canada is doing. This is shameful. And I tell people, as being born here, I'm ashamed of what Canada is doing. I used to be very proud. I've worked in international health in different places of the world, which I chronicle in my book. So there's not a pitch for my book, but if anybody wants to have it, doesn't have it, I know you'll pitch it. But I used to be very proud of what Canada was doing around the world. I'm ashamed. We're promoting abortion. We're promoting assisted suicide. We're going around the world say, kill the disabled, kill the depressed. Let them, it's freedom. It's not freedom. It's totally opposite to freedom. We've abandoned medical care. We've abandoned medical care ethics. We've abandoned everything. That's basically my message. So get out there, any forums, any people continue the message to senators, to those who are still standing up, regardless of, I don't know what the reasons for the Conservatives or the NDP, what their motivation was for standing against it. But whoever's on our side, at least, is not against us. I think we need to keep the message out. And I think we should even say you should reverse it. This is shameful. Trudeau, you should be ashamed of yourself. Everyone who voted for it should be ashamed of yourself. I'm not Jewish, but I think we should use the shame model of maybe shaking them up. I hear people say that the people who, I say Jewish because often I hear my Jewish friends say, well, you sound Jewish because that's the way we were brought up, to be embarrassed and ashamed. But I'm saying, no, it's the, and Jesus, the Christian, the leader of Christianity, wasn't afraid to tell people when they were going down the road. That's why he talked about the Good Samaritan. We can't be afraid. We need to go out there, tell people, wherever we come from, whether from a secular model, a humanist model, whether from a Judeo-Christian model, we have to say, no, this is wrong. Other countries don't do what Canada's doing. It's shameful and it's wrong.
So I have a few chat questions. The one mentioned about the NDP, and I agree, because the NDP voted in favor of Bill C7 in December, the original bill, and none of them opposed it. Now, there might have been a few of them who went to the washroom, but nonetheless, I don't know exactly how many of them, meaning that they didn't vote, right? They didn't show up to vote. But they voted against the amendments. Now, the reason they said they were voting against the Bill C7 amendment was not because they were opposed, even though I'm sure some of them were. It was because they said that they opposed the Senate, because remember, Canada's Senate's unelected, and the NDP opposes an unelected Senate. So therefore, because it was the Senate who made the amendments, they opposed it. I'll accept that at this point, but there wasn't enough votes. The Bloc, funny enough, the Bloc Québécois, who also opposed the existence of the Senate, voted in favor of it. So anyway, another question here is, should we continue to contact senators? And the answer at this point is yes. The only thing that I have to say as a caveat is the fact that the Senate overwhelmingly voted in favor of the motion for euthanasia for mental illness at the when they voted for their amendments. So it's not that I'm saying it's not a good thing to write to them. I published a letter today from Graydon Nicholas, who is a native leader, former lieutenant governor or lieutenant governor of New Brunswick, and he was the first native person who was appointed a judge in Canada. So, he's significant to the Native community, and he wrote about how this is against their beliefs. But the biggest point I have to make is that, sadly, those who are Canadians here on the call today should know that we are now the example of what you should never do. Canada has become the example. We must know that this is, as sad as it is that's happening in Canada, we are the example to the world of what not to do. This is what's happened. Yeah, Graydon is a great man. That's correct, Cynthia. Absolutely. And the other thing is that we must be willing to talk about it that way. One of the things the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition is going to be focusing on, whether I'm happy about it or not, I don't have to be happy about it, is the example of Canada and why you cannot follow our lead. Other countries are actually doing similar things, and they're using similar language in their legislation. For instance, the New Zealand law that passed by a plebiscite last year uses some similar language to the Canadian law. This is not good whatsoever. So this is where it goes. If you're going to allow euthanasia and you're going to allow killing, they call it MAID, okay, medical aid in dying. What it is it is death by lethal injection, which is homicide, or it's death by assisted suicide, which is assisting a suicide. You provide the lethal drugs. This is what it is. Nonetheless, if you're going to allow that, then obviously speaking, the question becomes, who are you going to do it to and for what reasons? Once you open up the door, it's a serious problem. Now, I mentioned how there's a lack of definition in this law. And I mentioned the same thing about Bill C-14. I'm talking about Bill C-7, the same thing. Without real definition, it's wide open. So as bad as it is, the example of Canada is only going to get worse unless something can be done to change that. And politically speaking, at this moment, there needs to be change, or there will not be a change to future laws. There needs to be change. So are there any other questions to put into here? Yeah, we are too polite from Gordon. You're right, Gordon. Actually, we are way too polite. This is about killing. I agree. We can continue to pretend that our adversaries are only interested in a noble choice. Well, in fact, you're absolutely right, Gordon. And I said this years ago when I attended the World Federation of Right to Die Society's conference. It was years ago, and I wrote up the article, this booklet about it. And I was one of my earlier publications. That was actually a serious publication, right? Anyway, those people were involved with killing. Those people at the World Federation of Right to Die Society's conference, I thought what I was going to meet were people who shared an opposite perspective as I, but were for the most part, activist people who were concerned about what they believed. What I met were people who were involved with killing. They were committed to legalization because they were involved with killing people. And in their jurisdictions, it was illegal. Therefore, they needed a lot of change. That's what they were about. So we shouldn't be overly innocent about this. These people are involved, and they were involved with already previous to this killing. And I'm serious. Over the lunchtime, you're sitting there, and they're talking about, the one woman talking about how she killed her mother. And she explained that, oh, well, I told people that what I did is I saved up the morphine until I had enough morphine to overdose my mother to kill her. But the morphine didn't work, she was explaining. And here we're having lunch, she's telling us this. The morphine didn't work. This was a woman from New Zealand. It's actually a well-known case. And she said the morphine didn't work, so I had to use a pillow to finish off my mom. She's telling us that over lunch as we're eating. And you're wondering why these people are so committed to killing? It's because they were killing already. Okay? They were involved with killing already. They want the law to protect them for what they were doing. Dr. Saba might have a word to say, and then we're going to end the call, and it's going to be uploaded, and people can watch us in the future. But you're exactly right, Gordon. We are far too polite. You have any final words, Dr. Saba?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I think this is a great opportunity for us to warn people around the world and to say, don't do what we're doing here. This is, we're here, we're experiencing it, we're watching it. We're here in the bunkers. The bombs are going off everywhere. We're wiping people off the face of the earth. Use that as an analogy, but we're staying here. We're continuing to fight. We don't have lots of resources, but we're going to warn you not to do what we've done. And I think that can be a powerful message.
And because Dr. Saba, actually, he's got his book in the background, but he hasn't actually lifted it to, If you want to order his book, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition sells his book, Made to Live. It's actually a very good book. He did the book in the format that I was really happy with. He told a lot of stories. These were personal stories. He got into other things too, but I mean, he did tell a lot of personal stories in his book, and I think that's effective. And so if you want to order the book Made to Live, we're happy to sell it to you. We keep ordering copies off him, so therefore you can just go to the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. We're happy to do so. If you have any questions, email them to info@epcc.ca, info@epcc.ca. And I'd like to thank Gordon Friesen for joining us. He's a member of our board. And Dr. Saba took time out of his day. As a physician, he's able to make serious money by seeing patients, and yet he's spending time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.